Hello everyone, welcome to the Ontology of Value YouTube channel. We've been away for some time, but we are all back. And now I'd like to introduce you to the whole new list of guests and interesting topics all around self-navigation and professional development in today's complex job market. So, today I'd love to introduce you to my dear hiking friend Andrew Akbashev. Andrew works at Paul Scherrer Institute as a lead of a research team exploring the fundamental nature of various phenomena and employing a range of sophisticated facilities, all from atomically precise synthesis to synchrotron and neutron techniques and transmission electron microscopy. Apart from that, Andrew is an apt creator and speaker for academia via multiple social media outlets such as LinkedIn and X. He touches fundamental problems of academic systems such as inefficiencies and demand for new solutions for young researchers, as well as career development and self-navigation in the complex world of knowledge industry. I can promise to you that this will be an interesting interview. And so thank you for joining us today, and let's go. Thank you so much, Andrew, for joining us today.
Yes, I'm happy to be
here.
Thank you.
Honor to have you here. So I'd like to first ask you about your personal journey up to this point, because you have that unique role today of representing young academics on social media, and you actually ignite a lot of interesting discussions on LinkedIn and through other platforms. At the same time, you have a full-time job as a senior researcher. So how did it happen? How did you evolve in this direction? And so what do you think was the origin of your career story?
That's a good question. But first of all, I should say that, yes, I do a lot of posting online and I'm trying to get the community engaged, but there are many, many other people, especially today. It wasn't the case 2 years ago, but today by far, there are many people who do the same thing. So I think that's what we see as community flourishing online. So I did my PhD at Drexel University in Philadelphia some time ago. And then I moved to a postdoc at Stanford. So back then, I was mostly working on like fundamental sciences, and I really liked the research, quite like I like today. But I think at that time, I didn't quite notice what's wrong with academia. I felt like, okay, I'm in the environment that it should be like this. That's it's supposed to be. And I wouldn't say that were no struggles, but I wouldn't say I was in a particularly bad situation. It was great overall. However, when I was getting to the end of my postdoc and I was applying for faculty positions across the United States, I realized that the way people judge new faculties and the way they select them is not quite in line with sort of my own perspective or my own ethics, if you like. So people tend to look at the number of papers. People tend to look at, are you from Harvard or are you from a university of whatever? People tend to look at where you did your postdoc, who's your supervisor, who wrote your recommendation letter. Is the big name or it's a name that nobody knows? No matter how good your recommendation letter is, name matters. And so there were a lot of these little things that I wasn't particularly happy about, because I felt like it actually makes it hard for, and I observed quite a number of people who were excellent scientists, excellent researchers, who could not find place in academia because of the very big competition for faculty positions. They just couldn't go through, as they were a little bit maybe more down to earth in some way. They didn't publish as many papers. Maybe they preferred a lot more fundamental science as opposed to, say, engineering, which is a lot more popular these days. So when I saw that, and I was like, okay, well, what could I do? Of course, I couldn't do anything except that I could just try to find a position that would be more like a senior position, a scientist or a group leader or a faculty, and maybe do a bit of outreach. And that's the time, it was the time when I moved to Paul Scherrer Institute in Switzerland on invitation. And that's the time when COVID started. So what it means for some people who don't forget, like who don't remember what it was like, we were all sitting at home, right? So meaning that the social media got flooded with a lot of scientists. So a lot of people from academia just moved there. And it was quite fun to see it. And I should say that before that, I almost never used social media too. So it was the time when I was like, okay, perhaps that's an opportunity to speak up. Now that I'm independent, I don't have somebody who's going to tell me, oh, Andrew, you should not say this, you should not say that because you're from a lab and we are going to be whatever, in trouble. It was the good time then for me to start sort of engaging with people and trying to say, okay, maybe that's the better way to do it, or the old practices here are good, but here are bad, and so on. And so that's how it started slowly. I wouldn't say like I spent a lot of time on this, but also I was quite surprised to see a lot of engagement. So it was very interesting to see, like, whenever you post something about science, nobody engages. Whenever you post something about something bad happening in science, a lot of people engage. So it turned out that a lot of people are actually not, like, they were hungry for a conversation, for a discussion of all of these issues that have accumulated in science. And of course, when I talk to one-on-one to a lot of professors, to more senior people who face these issues when they left their postdoc, when they left PhD programs, then I realized that actually people talk about it a lot, but internally. Like nothing comes out externally. Like it's like an incubator where everything is sort of enclosed. And the social media is actually now is these holes that let the vapor come out. And then you can see, okay, it's boiling here and it's boiling there. And there are issues here and there. And today we can see the last like 3 years or almost 4 years since pandemic started, there is a big change. So people speak quite openly about something like data manipulation, something like somebody got fired because of whatever, student mismanagement, lack of mentorship, and so many other things that we all have, right? As issues. So I think that this is how, in some way, for me, I was just lucky to ride the right wave in some way, because that wave was coming anyway, because people were frustrated, and then the COVID hit, and then it was like 10 times more frustrated, and people were like, okay, they wanted to talk about it. So I think it doesn't matter who starts, it's more like how many people engage. And today we see it's a wave. It was actually a wave. Back then it was not quite clear, but today it's pretty clear that it's changing the landscape. And yet still it's quite archaic. So our academia is still archaic, extremely archaic, and it's hard to imagine that wave will change a lot. But I see there are things, there are triggers, there are, for example, workshops for PhD students about how to do their PhDs, how to excel in their post-PhD careers. It wasn't like this when I was a PhD student. Maybe I just missed some of them, but it wasn't like this. And today it's kind of becoming a norm, and I like it. So I would say a lot of people probably have the same stories. Some people left academia and they continue talking about it online. And it's excellent because PhD students can see that there's life beyond academia. Like academia is not a fortress where you're enclosed. Like you can go out and it's okay. The life there is pretty happy. Mm-hmm. And there are, of course, professors who stay in academia, definitely talking about the hurdles, the problems, and like how to make life of PhD students better. So I think we're in a very interesting situation today.
Yeah, I completely agree. Actually, when I was starting my PhD in 2013, there was still this climate where leaving academia was seen as a bit of a failure, at least in the institute where I was studying. So it was not in a good tone to talk openly about it as a PhD student. It was like, oh, are you giving up or what? Right? The people were only talking about it in private with closest friends by beer, but not at the lab meeting in the office.
That's definitely the case.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it changes, so that's great. And I think in general the job market and the work culture today is changing, and I think the different work environments melt together. And I can also see that there is increasing amount of projects that span between academia and business and technology. And there are like new research projects in R&D departments in big tech,
Mm-hmm.
in biopharmaceutical companies as well, and they publish peer-reviewed research papers. And at the same time, academics also runs the spin-off startups, and there are these incubators around the academic institutions. So it's just and also universities, public universities started also like scooping some of the online education market. So they also open their doors to get a certificate. You can take pretty much any course at Harvard or Stanford if you pay enough, right? Online, 100,000 people can take a
And there are
course.
many free courses, so things become a lot
Yes.
more open
Yeah.
and available.
Yeah, but today, like, just so they basically start kind of trading their educational services to any consumer who wants to participate, and at the same time, private universities and private online schools and even like businesses started also competing. They also want to train. There are even like I have a friend who was not accepted for a program as an astronaut. Like she was a NASA space engineer and she wanted to become a full-time astronaut, but they only drew 27 people out of 23,000 and she didn't make it. So she decided that she will not just let go just like this. And she's opening her own school for astronauts that's going to be private. And she's like, well, the space industry is growing so fast. Why don't we have more ways in which anyone who is enough fit and educated and wants to
There's
become an
a lot
astronaut
of this
actually has a chance?
entrepreneurship entering the academia.
Yeah.
It's a lot more than before. Before it felt like there was a lot still, but today it's a lot more. And I think it will only increase.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we live in times of great fusion, and it's actually great. I have a question about your content because you publish, like in my view, so consistently, and so you're so diligent about it, and every single post is a story, and it's a consistent story about another topic that is related to the problems and the evolution of academia. So I'm curious where your inspirations come from.
It's a very good question. I think most stories come from my own experience. I think I'm one of those people who is quite sensitive to when things go wrong. And I have a feeling like, okay, there's a postdoc supervising a PhD. That's not good. Or there is a professor saying like weird jokes about a student. That's not good. Or there is a funding manager, whatever, funding decision that doesn't make sense at all. Doesn't matter from which angle, like it's just not ethical. Or there's a conference where everyone discusses whose battery is better instead of discussing what science is happening inside of it. So these things, they get me, like I feel them very easily. I can see them easily. I don't know if it's just me or like everyone perhaps, but just I notice them, and it's easy for me to come up with certain topics to discuss. It doesn't mean like it's always super smooth and nice. Not at all. But in most cases, the problems are pretty easy to identify when you just observe them closely. And I'm sure there are many, many more that I have never talked about. That some people make posts about things that I never thought about. I'm like, okay, yes, that sounds like a really good problem to solve, and I never thought about it. So it's as diverse as academia is diverse.
So would you call it ethics, like some inborn sense of ethics or empathy, or like what do you think it is?
I wouldn't say it's inborn, but maybe I'm a bit sensitive to things when there's no justice, when I feel like it's not quite justified. Like the treatment of PhD students not justified, this sort of little funding here is not justified, or this huge funding given for something that doesn't make sense at all is not also justified. But it's like everyone, like you talk to many professors and they will say a lot of things they don't like. So it's like a lot of people are sensitive to that. It's totally normal, but I think not everyone wants to put it into writing. That's the difficulty. And that's why once a year I try to say online, like we need more academic influencers online on social media, because it's where you can say what you don't like and spread it around and help people think about it. Like, is it right or not? People can argue. They have to make their own, of course, decisions and opinions. But at the same time, if we don't speak about it, don't speak up, then the changes will be very slow. So like, yeah, people call it activism in some way, but I wouldn't call it activism. It's more like trying to get the community to think. Like not every single post of mine is as, I would say, interesting or straightforward. Some things I post intentionally to spark a debate. that's sort of ideal. So when you describe a situation from slightly different angles, that people are like, oh, okay, maybe it's actually not good, or like you have to think a little bit differently, and they start to argue with each other. Great, but it sparks debates. So there's nothing else that you can do to really improve the mindset. And then because after you have that demand for a change overall, that's when new policies come into play. It's at least the ones that would be more sort of science friendly.
Right. And given that you decided to speak up and you consistently do so, I'm curious. Imagine that you're applying for a tenure position, like at some new university, like some other research institute. Do you think that your career as a, yeah, sort of an activist would be a pro or con to your application? How do you
Good
think it would
question.
be treated?
Yeah, I think so. First of all, I wouldn't call it a career of activism because I don't earn money on this. So this is, I feel like I do it for free. So I just do it because I feel there's an urge inside. So yeah, I can be silent, but I feel like when I say things out loud, then it's easier, sort of. And then I feel like I'm helping people some people even to survive, because there are a lot of PhD students in really big trouble, and they tell me that my posts sometimes help them, encourage, and so it's important. And at the same time, of course, if you cross the lines, and you need to know those lines, then yep, you will have trouble with a lot of people, by all means. But that's the case everywhere. If I want to get hired somewhere, I don't think it will be a downside for most places,
Hmm.
because I don't think I say anything that doesn't make sense. But there are certain things which can spark debates. And of course, for example, if my view on how students should be mentored during PhD, how science should be done, and so on, and how much funding I should be getting, and all this, if my views do not align with some department's views, then I will not be hired there. But it happens anyway during interview. So they don't have to read my post. They don't have to see it online. They will just talk to me. And
Hmm.
I will say, well, okay, that's the way I think it should be done. That's the way I will do it. And they will say, sorry, you don't have a good fit here.
Right. Yeah. Well, great point.
Mm-hmm.
Again, talking about your, let's say, hobby then, your activity as a speaker for academia. Do you think, what do you think about the effective, let's talk about effective altruism, like effective impact of such a campaign on via social media on change in academia versus legislative analysis? So talking from behind, like working from behind the scenes, because you could like impact academia from different corners, and you chose to go in front of people, talk about the problems.
Mm-hmm.
Some people tend to choose going like sliding into the public
Right.
institutions and
Right.
working on the legislation from behind the scenes. So what do you think is more influential way of impacting and positive change, introducing positive
Well,
change to academia?
yeah, I mean, this division is everywhere, right? In a general society, in any country, you have the same. You have people. So the society should be ready for a change, and then somebody makes that change.
Hmm.
Somebody who's writing the policies, who's signing those policies, right? So there should be in some way, it's a political force. There should be some pressure from the society. Same goes with academia. There should be some pressure from, say, PhD students to improve their life during their PhD. Okay, so if that happens, then of course there will be policies. So some universities will improve their own policies. Some universities will introduce special courses for PhDs to find a better career path or whatever, be more diversified. And so those universities will become more competitive. And as a result, PhDs will go there. But then
Hmm.
if it comes to, say, more on the governmental level, then you have to work with funders often, or with some policymakers. In those cases, again, if there's no request from the community, I don't think it will be implemented. We
Hmm.
see sometimes it happens, but often for some reason, things that are implemented, they don't often make sense to others.
Hmm.
Like there could be cuts in funding on this, or like excessive funding on that. And of course, some people will benefit. So anyway, somebody's trying to advocate for something. It can be behind the scene, like you say, advocating for funding for something that they want to get eventually. It's within their own interests. It's like a bit of a lobbyism, sort of. And at the same time, you can do it in public online, and then you get the actual scientists seeing that and discussing that. And when somebody who's making policies or wants to introduce some policies see it, they can take it as an example of, okay, there is some demand. So I think that the second is better option when it's public than when it's too private. Like private discussions of how to change academia will probably not benefit everyone because a lot of people are neglected in those cases. So if we compare what you say an act, it's like online discussions versus legislation, so policy making internally, I think everyone has to decide for themselves. So some people are great at internal discussions and convincing certain people internally, so those who are decision makers, what policies should be implemented. And others are really great at online discussions or public speaking or whatever. So some people are both, but I think that we need both. And there's no like which one is better because one cannot exist without another.
Right. If you ever have a chance to take part in a think tank or some other advisory board for the Swiss government?
I haven't. But of course, I was contacted a fair number of times by people who use my posts as a guide to change certain policies or propose certain policies. Some people ask my opinion on certain things, so it happens. But I wouldn't say like it happens that often. So the actual amount of like the number of people who read my posts and see them and is by far bigger than those who reach out for like an advice. But it's I don't think I can give any extra advice on top of what I write. So I'm pretty transparent in that sense. So you can use my posts for that.
But if you ever have a chance, would you do it?
Perhaps yes. Depends. But depends on what is the goal. Let's say it this way. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so you currently have your own students, right? So you can see.
I'm an advisor, yeah, in that sense.
Right. So you can see what kind of everyday bottlenecks do today's PhD candidates struggle with, right? So what are the main difficulties in what do you see as the main difficulties in a early stage of research careers today?
You mean then difficulty with when the person is already a PhD student, or difficulty in general with a PhD programs?
What I'd like to ask is how to self-navigate as a PhD student in 2024 to make sure that you properly take care of your academic career. What do you think is the hardest part, and how to make sure that you are on the right path? And also, what would you advise to today's first year PhD candidates?
There are a lot of things I can say here, but let's say it this way. If you're a PhD in your first year, I would not advise you thinking too much about the next career steps, because often your first few years of your PhD shape that anyway. They shape your perception, and then you can change the way you think about your career. In general, it depends on where you are. So which field you are in. Are you in social sciences, biosciences? Are you life sciences, or you're in engineering, in physical science, whatever, math? So there could be so many different options, and a lot of experience depends on that. For places like chemistry, chemical departments, physics departments, chemical engineering, mechanical engineering, and so on, I think the key for any PhD student is to find the right lab. So the right lab, the right advisor. If you're in your first PhD year and you're on a rotation system, meaning that you can still go through different labs and see what fits you best, try to find the advisor who really cares for you. That's by far the biggest, like the right advisor is your biggest ticket to your next steps. So you want to make sure that you can be supported financially, that you don't have financial limitations. Like you can go to conferences, you can go to workshops, you can buy chemicals, buy substances, do whatever calculations you want. You have whatever else. So second is you need to make sure you have mentorship. That's personal development. So research advising is not mentorship. A lot of people confuse mentorship with like research advising. They're different things. So your advisor may be great at helping you navigate your research field, but he or she may be not so great at mentoring you, meaning that explaining a bigger picture, explaining how and what matters in communication skills, for example. How do you acquire them? How do you become a good thinker? How do you think about your career? So all these advices, they are disconnected from your research often. And if you get the right advisor, you will get the most out of your PhD. Your research is important, yes, but still the advisor is the person who just shapes everything. And we see it everywhere. You can see it online, a lot of discussions on this. And of course, you want to make sure that your advisor and your lab has a certain emphasis. So the emphasis that you're looking for, if you're looking for an emphasis on like number of papers, okay, you find this lab. If you're looking for an emphasis on the quality of papers or quality of research, you're looking for something else. So there's a lot of things that can change from lab to lab. And my suggestion, just explore it as much as you can before you make a decision. So that's when you have it. Now, if you have made the decision already and you join the lab, then things become a bit, things depend. If you're in a lab where you're well taken care of, financially, mentorship wise, and in general, then you probably will be fine. So then there are things that you can do. If not, then there is a problem with, if you can find a different lab, try to do that. If you feel like there's no such a chance, you can think of even leaving a PhD at the master level if you don't have a master. If you do have a master, then it's a very difficult decision then, because I have a lot of students, literally hundreds of students, reaching out to me saying that, okay, we're stuck in our PhD in the first, second year. What should we do? And that's why I'm saying that you try to think of your PhD as your pathway to a success. And if it doesn't lead to a success, if you see that an average PhD student from that lab is really not successful at all, you don't want to end up there, think twice if you want to continue. So just be careful. But everyone's situation is different. Some people have immigration difficulties, others have financial difficulties. So you need to decide. So it's a very difficult decision. Now, when you're in the first year, but then you're you're more or less happy and you want to keep going, and now think about your career. My suggestion is, of course, like everyone says, start thinking about the career earlier. Why is it important? It's because when you do a PhD, you do a lot of research. A lot of research absorbs you. In most labs, you work more than you should be working, actually. So you overwork. That overwork completely overfocus you on the research. You have no time, no energy to think about anything else. And that's when the problem starts, because time flies. You will realize you're not a first year anymore, you're a third year, you're a fourth year. Like you have very little time to decide on what you want to do, but you have no more resources to do that. Like you have no time, maybe you have no conference to go to, or you have to decide today or tomorrow or within the next few months, whatever, because you're getting close to your defense, and your defense is also extremely time-consuming time. So what should you do? And I think if you start earlier, like in the end of your first year, that's the best time. When you start like having a feeling, okay, I wish I could do this and I wish I could do that. Let me explore it. Let me attend some courses on entrepreneurship while they're still possible to attend. Let me go to talks by, say, CEOs of different companies that come to my university. Let me go to not tenure evaluation, but let's say faculty interviews that are open to public at my university and see what faculties look like when they come. Do I want to go to academia? What do candidates look like? Like try to get engaged into that early on, because then by the time you graduate, you will have a clear idea of what each pathway looks like. At least you will have a way better than if you just forget about everything. And then a few months before you graduate, you're like, oh, I need to find a new job. Where am I looking for? So this is extremely important. And then I think there are a few more problems. One is that I see that a lot of people still are not realistic. So some people kind of downvote themselves, if I can say this way,
Mhm.
meaning that they think they're not up to so many tasks, even though they are. And others are overestimating their abilities. So they think, oh, like, yeah, we can get this and this and this. And then they start applying and they're like, oh my God, no one wants this. Like, why? So that's why being realistic, like knowing where you can go and how and what is important for that is key. That's why starting like thinking in advance about all this and exploring it is really important.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
a great response. Like so much information. Can I ask? Add one question from my
of
side.
course.
I think also I observed that in the past decade, the attitude to PhDs changed a bit. So when I was starting about a decade ago, it was still like the vast majority of fresh PhD candidates were planning to develop full-fledged career in academia. And I feel like, at least in the Netherlands nowadays, most start with the assumption that this is the last part of their education process. They are fully aware of the statistics that, well, most likely they will not find jobs in academia after their PhD, so they're realistic from the start. And I think especially, and it was initially shocking to me that you can commit yourself to such a time-consuming work for and so deep in one subject for 4 years or 5 years if you know from the get-go that you're not going to continue on the same career track, and yet people do it. But it's understandable. And actually, when I started traveling more often to US, I can see that there are certain meritocratic societies where PhD is really highly valued. It's a token of quality and excellence in certain discipline, and it might be seen as an investment in yourself as a professional. So it might have perfect sense to actually commit to that huge effort in one area for a few years just to get to that excellence level. And but I also want to say that when I look back, I think that it's also important, especially if you have that mindset, okay, this is the last stage of my education, then it's extremely important to look into transferable skills, because when you at the stage of planning your research project, there might be a variety of projects even in within one lab. And just coming back in memory to my PhD times, I was in a few labs, one of them being fMRI research. I was planning to stay in academia back then, but just in case, I was also thinking about, like, strategically about the portfolio of skills I was developing, because some other PhD students were collecting the data from clinical patients during their PhD, so they were spending 50% of their time collecting data before they started analyzing. Some PhD students were developing new protocols for data analysis, specifically for fMRI scanners. So this was very like specific job work that was like specific type of skill that was not transferable anywhere outside fMRI research. And I specifically focused on analyzing data and learning all the machine learning paradigms and causal discovery, just because I knew that when I learned the assumptions of these methods and I solely focused on analyzing data, I could just go with this knowledge anywhere else and it will be useful. And it actually was useful, because in the end, when I started the company, I like used some of the techniques I learned, precisely the same things. I could reapply them to a completely different psychometric data sets, and it worked for me. So I already thought this way back then, but I think if I ever started a PhD again in any type of discipline, that would be my first thought, like what is the portfolio of skills I want to learn, and how do I make sure that I cherry pick the projects that give me the most opportunity afterwards.
Right. That's important, but also keep in mind that if you don't know if you want to go to industry or outside of academia, let's say, and into academia, then if you end up on a faculty track, then unique expertise may be of advantage.
That's
So
true.
it depends on the situation. In many cases, if your skills are, a lot of people have your skills and your experience, then of course it's hard to come up with something new and interesting and convince others that you're the right candidate, as opposed to being unique. But being unique means you need to find the right fit. So it doesn't mean like there are many positions for this sort of unique experience across different universities, or even just like regular jobs. And so, yes, there is a balance. So normally, that's why I say that, okay, PhD is not about your thesis, and it's not just about your research that you do, not about your courses, whatever. It's about your personal development. But at the same time, of course, so your research comes as a byproduct of your self-development in some way. For example, let me think. So if you want to go for a faculty, you want to know everything about the things that you're proposing in your proposal. You want to make sure you're absolutely perfect as a fit for the position and as a person who can do that proposal. At the same time, your background should fit it too very well, of course. So it's not just your proposal, not what you also think, but also what you had in the past, what sort of awards you get in which field, what sorts of papers you published, certainly, and what kind of recommendation letters in which regard, in which direction they were written, and how positive they are. So all that matters. Now, if you don't want to go into academia, now you want to go to industry or outside of academia, make a company, maybe whatever you like, then there, of course, what counts is a lot of things that are transferable. If you can use an NMR, that's great. But being super specialized in NMR and that's it of course, it means like you will have a hard time finding something that is reasonably interesting to you, perhaps. But doing programming, a lot of programming and data analysis, big data analysis, today is, of course, it's also related to machine learning. So all that is extremely important. So I would certainly suggesting being an excellent speaker makes you stellar candidates in many places. Being a person who can write outstanding text, technical text, is also a big thing. So there are a lot of things that you can bring with you. So that's why as a PhD, you want to make sure you focus on not just your problem, but focus also on yourself. Like when you write something, think of how you can improve it so you can learn how to write better. When you speak about something, think about how you can improve your speech. You can improve the way you speak to, again, become better. It's kind of obvious, right? I mean, to me, it's like, oh, yeah, of course. But how else can it be? But then when you're a PhD student, for some reason, it doesn't happen. 90% of the cases, it doesn't happen across the world. We see it all the time when we interview people. So most candidates have a lot of problems with so many things that they were supposed to learn. And I understand there are many reasons. There could be abusive advisors. There could be very complex experiments that didn't have time for like speech and whatever, personal development. There could be advisors who don't mentor. So there are a lot of reasons for this. But still, I think that if you focus on it yourself, many universities have resources that are uniquely available to you. And of course, today we have online presence of so many people who can show or who can tell you what is best, or at least you can judge if that fits you or not. YouTube is full of stuff. You can develop yourself. You don't even need a PhD in that sense. So I think it's like it really depends on what you're looking for. But I agree that having transferable skills is absolutely important, but also having certain expertise just in case you want to be competitive when they compare, like if they're looking for someone to do NMR at, I don't know, somewhere else in some labs, some R&D, then you want to be the best. But at the same time, if some other company is looking for someone to do data analysis on some whatever molecules or some outcome of some measurements, you also want to be there among the best. So it's a combination, and try to get the best out.
Actually, I think in a sense, research career is quite entrepreneurial in a sense that you have to be a jack of all trades. You have to have this portfolio of skills that is quite broad. Like I agree with you. It's I also personally know a lot of extremely talented young researchers who just lock themselves in their cubicles and never walk out, never talk to people, and then they kind of lose in auto presentation and salesmanship skills and eventually don't get far. To some extent, at least I can tell that for me, it seems that a public education system is partly responsible for it. at least like I was raised in Polish system, and we had scholarships that were really they were kind of amplifying whatever you're best at, right? So if you're best, like if you're extremely talented in mathematics, they would just like put a lot of funds on your like
Exactly.
your education in
That's a
mathematics. You'll get
problem.
scholarships. Yeah, and I had this issue. I was good. I was a good student, a strong student, but I was not winning international Olympiads in any major. So I was never like never got any scholarship. And the kids who were just poor at everything except for one subject that they were extremely good at, they were getting all the money and all the attention. I felt kind of overlooked as a youngster, but now I feel like actually in the long run it's actually good to have that vast portfolio of skills, even if you're not a world master in any one of them, but then that makes you really functional in the job market.
Sure. Yes, that's how it goes. But then, so regarding the ways that kids can be selected and promoted and given fellowships and whatever for next education steps, I think that there are a lot of things that should be discussed with the people who really know the way things work at this psychological level, sort of them. Because it's, for example, I can see a big advantage of that, because a lot of people from places where they couldn't find any way out of, they found a way out, so they could get a fellowship, and because they were talented in some way, okay, great. But then, of course, the question is, do we have to reward only the talented people, or how do we make sure that those talented people also expand their abilities beyond their immediate talents to make sure that they can utilize that talent to the fullest extent? These are difficult things, and I think the education people who work in education, they argue about this most of the time. That's why different countries have different policies. Right. Otherwise, everything would be the same. If it's too straightforward, it's not quite. Yeah. Maybe I can mention a few more things, that because you mentioned about the career advice to a PhD student, and I think if some PhD students are listening to this, maybe they will find it more important, sort of, because what I see is a lot of PhD students don't quite use career fairs, conferences, and workshops to the extent when they can truly benefit from this. I see that students come to conferences just to attend talks, give a talk, well, maybe talk to fellow students and leave. Most students do this way. And I think it's okay, but then sort of you do your science part, but you don't do your career part. And a conference is an amazing opportunity to build networks, is an amazing opportunity to explore potential networks, explore people, explore career paths, and so on, because there are so many people met together in one place, brought together, and they are longing for individual meetings. And then a lot of students just don't use that. So maybe I can just advise you, if there are any who are interested in this, to think of your conference as your sort of opportunity to develop yourself in networking, not to network it by itself, because you cannot network with people if you don't have any real reason to network. Like if you don't have a project that you can work together and so on, it's a bit difficult. But you can learn how to network. And I rarely see students doing it. Some of them do, but very few. So for example, if you're a student, if you come to a conference, if you want to go for a postdoc somewhere, try to find people from that lab, have lunches with them, go to dinners, organize like a meeting of people who don't know each other. Just send emails to like 5-6 PhD students from the labs that you know or heard about and you're curious, like say, oh, here I am this and this. I'm really curious to meet new people, and I'm working in this field. We're sort of fellow students in the same field, that maybe we can have a joint lunch and just have a bit of discussion about what's going on in our labs and so on. So you can make really good connections with this. And I rarely see people do it. So maybe it's time to start, because a lot of students seem to be just scattered around the conference, sitting alone, and doesn't look like they're very happy.
Yeah. Actually, I also noticed that it really depends on the principal investigator or supervisor, because some supervisors advise their students to go explore the community, and some supervisors tend to be more, they actually like to see their students flock together and kind of, treat the conference like, like
Like
trip
a retreat.
Yeah, like a retreat, yes.
Everyone just gets together. Let's just stick together. Let's not depart from each other. Yeah, it's I agree. Like, it's also a very strange behavior, to be honest, because I think the best you can do at a conference is to talk to others. You will talk to your own fellow lab members perfectly fine in the lab. There's no problem with this usually, right? So a conference is not a retreat. A conference is a place where you look for open doors. So you have to use the conference. You don't just attend it. You attend it not for like a talk.
Yeah, I remember my PhD times. Like, I was always the outlier who was a maverick, like walking around and just and I felt like other PhD students in my lab, they looked at me like a bit of a disloyal one, because I was not eating with them like on conferences. I was like, what for? Like, we came all the way to Hawaii, like 24-hour on the way, one way, and you want me to talk to you and like have lunches? Like, we have lunch every day. Like, why?
Yes, I mean, I would even put it maybe more bluntly. I think the social interaction with your own group members can wait when you have a chance to have social interactions with someone else. That's right. It's blunt, but still it's right to the point. Like, you want to make sure you utilize that time. Talk to people, talk to professors, talk to postdocs, absorb as much experience as possible, because once you leave the conference, there will be no way back that you can get back and talk to someone. And especially if you want to build your career, if you want to learn more, if you want to get the most out of your PhD, of your conferences, you need to be really active in that regard. And also, it's very important, I think, that I have a feeling like a lot of students, and not only students, also professors too, a lot of people feel like they come to a conference and they have no one to talk to, and no one wants to talk to them. It's like a lot of strangers around. Let me just stay alone because everyone is a stranger. Like, I can see it. So that if people know each other, they will overlap, but often people they try not to approach each other, not to the extent that I wish it could be. So especially to students, it's very important to understand that when everyone thinks that no one wants to approach them, it just means like no one's approaching each other. Like, you want to, if you're the first, people will be super happy to talk to you, like super happy. Just do it, and then you will see like things all of a sudden change completely. So a lot of 90% of the people will be super happy to be contacted about the lunchtime, about discussions, about like sharing experience, whatever. If you're nice to them, if you're kind to them, if you're trying to be non-aggressive, because things happen, most people will be super happy. So a conference is made for this. So don't be shy. So being shy is the biggest mistake you can make at a conference.
Actually, if I can add something, I think hiring in academia is different from hiring in industry, in the sense that there is a high cost to making mistake. So if you're at the level of like applying for a PhD internship, a PhD fellowship, I think it's the last phase of academic career where you can actually jump in from outside and get land an interview without the PI really knowing you. But once you start applying for postdoc positions and more senior positions, then there's very little chance to get to the interview stage if you never shook hands with the person who is going to interview, because it's just, it's also a personal, like, personality match, a match on view at science. It's just, labs are relatively small and there's such a high cost to every hire.
Move to a new lab. Yes, if you move to a faculty, a postdoc position is still okay. So people will see you as they may see you for the first time. It's fine. But if you're really at a senior level, definitely people need to know you before they invite you. But everyone knows this anyway at the senior level. So.
Yeah. And how about like your lesson? So is there anything in your career that you think that if you could turn back time, you would do differently?
Well, for example, The way, like I said, now students can use the conferences. I didn't do it. It's a lesson
Oh,
that I learned. I can't say that I am perfect, by far not, but I learn on my mistakes. So that's something, but I rarely see people doing anyway. So at the student level. So I think it's really something that I definitely advise very strongly. I mean, there are many lessons. It just depends on which direction we go. So there are lessons that I learned from faculty applications. There are lessons that I learned looking for postdoc positions, looking for industry positions, maybe looking for some other things for funding and so on. So there's a lot of things. It really depends. Normally, you always have to keep learning. So if you don't if you don't get lessons out of your past year, it means something is wrong. So you're not doing the right thing, because if you're not learning, and you should learn from your mistakes too, then something is wrong when you're young.
right. Yeah, great. So lastly, I'd like to ask you a little bit about your other hobby, which is photography. So
Oh,
are
it's
you?
not my hobby. It's
Oh
just
no.
I'm pulling out the phone and take a photo and go next somewhere else.
Also, in that case, hiking is more of your hobby than photography. It's like I can see a lot.
I like doing a lot of things. So hiking is one of them. When you have mountains, you want to hike, right? You
Yeah,
want to
well,
ski.
I just yeah, like sounds logic. I'm just wondering how you find time for all these things because you have
Weekends
weekends.
and holidays. They're made for this. So use your holidays. Don't If you skip your holidays, you skip some moments that you will wish you could remember later.
Hmm.
And if you spend your holidays in the lab, you will probably, maybe you will be fine. So maybe you will get extra data that will save your life. I don't know. But in 95% of the cases, it's not happening. So it feels like, yes, I'm going to get a bit more and that paper will be out. But no, it won't. You will still have to wait and it will still be rejected. And then there will be like, whatever. But you wasted your holidays. So I had a lot of holidays skipped in the past because of I was focusing a lot on the academic career, and I wouldn't say like it helps all the time. It sometimes, yes, but I wouldn't say it. And I think that the more, if you have a more balanced life, if you can spend time outside of academia, exploring something, being curious about something else, except your research, then perhaps you can be like, each time you get back to your research, you have a fresh mind. So it helps finding better solutions, because if you over focus on a problem, it's very easy to not notice a big picture and an easy solution. So you want to actually be disturbed most of the time. But it depends on the person. Some people like being over focused on something. So it depends. But for me, I think it's important to be, to develop a little bit holistically. And of course, social media posting, for example, is one of them, right? So you develop yourself in public writing, public speeches. Sometimes when I have to speak about this in public, it's the same. There could be many other benefits. We can go over them, but in general, finding something that also complements what you do in your, as your main activity, can become your second nature later, can be a new career path later, can be something that can give you a lot of benefits, in addition to making your mind maybe a little bit more relaxed, which is very important in research. You want to be relaxed. You don't want to be super strained.
Mhm.
Normally, coming up with great ideas is difficult for most people when they're super strained.
So what do you think about when you spend the whole weekend hiking in these
For
beautiful
example,
places? What comes to mind? Or is it more of like a Zen state of like thinking about nothing at all?
whatever comes in mind, you can digest. It's okay, right? That's the point. I mean, in most cases, I try to just like absorb what I see. I'm a pretty visual person, so I like visuals, and my brain gets distracted by visuals easily. When I see like great views, when I see great things, when I see something unusual, like I like it. So then I can sit on the shore looking at the ocean for a long time, because it just gives me, I can start thinking about science, no problem, of course. But it also is a great distractor for me. And a great distractor means like when I get back, I have more room to think sort of, and in terms of work. So I can come up with good ideas. And sometimes, yeah, I can listen to a podcast, I can think, I can whatever. So there's no like something special that I have to do. No, not for me.
Yeah, but kudos for discipline to actually take free time as well. I try to do that for many years now, and my free weekends, yeah, complete failure, failed project so far. But yeah, maybe in the future. Yeah, good
Yeah,
job.
I mean, I guess it depends on also what you have to do. So if you like, I have a luxury of having Alps next to me now. Before I didn't have it, so it was different. It really depends. So to me, it's important to be in the right location so I can switch off for a bit of time and enjoy something else and then come back. So that helps me to refresh and like, yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, on that note, perhaps we can slowly come to the end of this interview. Thank you so much, Andrew, for all the advice and great insights on academic careers of today and their whereabouts. And thank you so much for taking the time to share with us. Well, I will be following your journey, obviously, and we'll enclose the links to your socials here so that the viewers can also follow, and yeah, highly recommend it. So thank you so much, Andrew, for taking the time to talk today.
Thank you, Natalia, for inviting. Yeah.